Part 58. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 571. As night fell, the official curfew made the New Year atmosphere in Linqiu County a bit duller. No people stopped in the streets and alleys. Occasionally, officers and soldiers walked past with guns and bows, and the friction of their armor made a squeaking sound. In the room on the second floor of the inn, Su Buling sat at the table, looking at the map with the help of an oil lamp, choosing a suitable route and rushing to Taiyuan as soon as possible. The nightingale couldn't put it down for the little sparrow. In the middle of winter, she would lie on the roof with the little sparrow as a sentry. It was quite warm to see each person and the bird from the back. After Zhongli Jiju comforted his apprentice, he came out of the room, returned to the house to get the bruise medicine, put it in a tray, and went to Su Buling's room. After being scolded by her apprentice, Zhongli Jiju was in a low mood. Her charming eyes were filled with a sense of grievance, and she entered the room gloomily. After putting down the tray, she sat next to Su Buling, staring at the oil lamp. Silent. The light in the winter night is dim, and the dim light reflects on the cheeks like mutton fat jade, which are crystal clear and pink. The cherry red sandalwood mouth outlines a sister is unhappy arc, and the bulging skirt rises and falls gently with the breathing. There were no words, but the meaning of "why don't you come and coax your sister" was clearly revealed. Su Buling put down the brush, glanced sideways, moved close to her, hugged her shoulders, and turned her face to face him. "Madam, did Chu Chu say something harsh?" Zhongli Jiju twisted her shoulders symbolically, not daring to talk back to her apprentice. She couldn't be aggrieved anymore in front of her husband. She hardened her brows and glared at Su Buling. "You damn boy, tell me clearly, who will I be in the future?" Asking this, it was obvious that Chu Chu's sarcasm just now had irritated Zhongli Jiju. "It doesn't matter if it's free, she is on an equal footing with Ning Yuhi, but if Su doesn't let this heartless person return to Suzhou, let her continue to serve a large group of sisters, or simply let her be a wet nurse to nurse Ning Yuhi's children. Is this okay?" Su Bulenling smiled gently, looked directly into Zhongli Jiju's eyes, moved slightly closer, and pouted. Zhongli Jiju was not a little daughter-in-law who was easy to fool, so she raised her hand and turned Su Buling's face away. "Don't try to change the subject. Sister, I've suffered so much for you, and I'm not a human being inside and out. If you don't give me an explanation, I won't let you touch me." Su Buling looked a little helpless and hugged her a little tighter. "In my eyes, they are all the same. There is no difference between them. Don't think about it." Zhongli Jiju was full of disbelief. "Then if your aunt and I fall into the water, who will you save first? You know martial arts. You dash." Zhongli Jiju stared, almost crying, and stamped his embroidered shoes. Okay, you all bully me, I deserve it for my ability, right? I can't cure Chu Chu, and I can't cure you either." As he said that, he took out a silver needle to poke Su Buling. Su Buling held Zhongli Jiju's wrist and said pleasantly, Okay, why do you look like a little girl? You think I'm old?" Su Bulenling's expression froze, and he spread his hands slightly. "Madam, if you do this again, I will resort to family violence." Zhongli Jiju raised her hand and pinched Su Buling's arm a few times, fiercely. "What? You still want to beat my sister? I've given you everything, and you can't bear to lose my temper? Come on, you can beat me to death. Anyway, if my husband doesn't care for his apprentice, there's no point in living." Su Bulenling's scalp was numb, so he had to cover his mouth and cough hard several times, making his face turn red. Zhongli Jiju's movement of crossing her waist froze, and she quickly stopped talking and held Su Buling's arm. "What's wrong with you?" "It's nothing. I met Sidu Yuejin and Chen Daizai in Pinggu and was beaten several times. There is no need to worry, madam." Zhongli Jiju's eyes were slightly startled, and he quickly held Su Buling's wrist to check that there was something wrong, but other than that, there seemed to be nothing wrong. Su Buling pressed the small hand on his wrist and said slightly weakly, "It's an external injury, not an internal injury. You can't tell anything by taking your pulse. Medical ethics emphasizes looking, hearing, asking and feeling, and simply feeling the pulse is not enough." Zhongli Jiju didn't care about complaining, helped Su Buling stand up, sat down by the bed, then took the healing medicine and said nervously, "Where's the injury?" Su Buling sat on the edge of the bed and casually touched the inside of his legs. "It hit Situ Yuejin, please show me." Hiss. Zhongli Jiju's face turned pale when he saw the place where Su Buling took the picture. The place that Su Buling took a random photo of was the aorta in a person's leg. It was slashed by Situ Yuejin's 9-ring knife weighing dozens of kilograms. It was a miracle that he was still alive now. Zhongli Jiju did not dare to be careless. She knelt down in front of Su Buling, her eyes level with her waist, and untied Su Buling's belt, moving carefully for fear of touching the wound. Su Buling looked down from a high position and looked at the beautiful couple kneeling in front of them. This perspective was very imaginative. There was a hint of smile in his eyes, but he did not make a sound. After a while, "Where is the injury? I didn't see it." "It's all swollen, look carefully." Su Buling ran his left hand through the hair beside Jiju's ear, held the back of her neck, and pressed it gently. "Ah!" Zhongli Jiju, who was looking carefully, stumbled and bumped into something on his forehead. After he reacted, his eyes showed unspeakable shame and anger. He punched it with his fist, got up, and was about to leave. Su Buling gasped, reluctantly grabbed Jiju's wrist and pulled her back, falling on the quilt, with a smile on her lips. "Madam, you are a doctor, how could you not save her? Bah, get out of here." Zhongli Jiju's face flushed, her back was turned to Su Buling and she was hugged tightly. She could only forcefully break Su Buling's fingers, and said angrily, "Let me go, you heartless person, who is like you? Let me go." Su Buling stopped his wife with one hand, pulled the quilt over and covered the two of them, raised his hand and turned Zhongli Jiju's cheek. Okay, it's late at night, wake up Shuchu and King Yi, later it's you who are embarrassed." "You." When Zhongli Jiju heard this, she was immediately frightened. Her eyes were angry and aggrieved. She pinched Su Buling's arm hard. "You bastard, you just suffered a big loss and you still don't remember it? What if it happens again? How can I behave if I'm caught?" Su Buling clung to him and wrapped the quilt a little tighter. "Everything has been exposed, what is there to be afraid of? It's a broken jar. You are the bastard, can you speak? If you try again, you won't listen to Mr. Xiang, right? You." Zhongli Jiju's face turned red and purple, and she resisted in a low voice, but she had no choice. In the end, she could only put on a weak look. "Ms. Sir, forget it, I'm having my period." Su Buletinling's eyes lit up. "That's good, let me teach you something else." Zhongli Jiju was at a loss for a moment, then he realized what he was doing and squirmed quickly. No. I was just joking, I remembered the wrong date. Oops, why are you so annoying, can't we talk first?" Su Buletinling moved his hands for a moment. Seeing that his wife gave up resistance, he nodded and hugged her a little tighter. "Okay, let's talk first." Zhongli Jiju breathed a sigh of relief, was silent for a moment, and took the initiative to shrink into Su Buling's arms. "Su Buling, how did you persuade Chu Chu these days?" "Chu Chu didn't have any quarrel with me, but she was obviously no longer close to me. I asked her if she..." The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 572. The morning light shines on the earth, and the common people are like ants, running back and forth on the roads and towns, some for 3 meals a day, and some for high-ranking officials and generous salaries. But looking down from the sky, it is like looking at ants on the ground. There is no difference between them. On a high peak in the sea of peach blossoms in Pingwu, a rickety old man in a cloth robe squinted his eyes and carefully looked at the ground beneath his feet. Occasionally, an eagle would fly over and stop next to the old man, pecking the old man's boots quite affectionately. Apparently he was curious as to why the auspicious beast that used to stand at the top of the Tai Chi Hall came here. Let's take off our armor and return to the fields. Don't worry about it anymore. Go find your master. With a smile in his eyes, the rickety old man lightly kicked the falcon squatting at his feet with his shoe. The falcon flapped its wings and rode the wind, straight into the sky, and flew over the 100-mile sea of peach blossoms. Watching the falcon go away, the old man turned around and walked down the mountain peak, walking slowly through the dense forests of the mountains, but soon arrived at the waterfall where Chendeazai was buried. After looking at the sword marks left on the rocks under the water, he flew down, landed on the edge of the canyon river, and continued to move inward. Walking along the way, he looked like an ordinary old man going out for a walk. Perhaps that was indeed the case. After all, he no longer belonged to any force. He was just one of the many ants under the sky. He was getting old and had nothing left to do. Yes, I just want to find a comfortable place to sleep. Passing through the winding river and thousands of peach trees, 3 small houses emerged from the peach trees. Outside the neat forest of saplings, there were several small holes. A woman in a blue sarong, holding a small hoe with great difficulty, was still digging small holes in the frozen mud. The black dog stood in front of it, with white mist spraying from its mouth and nose, and helping to dig with its paws. The sound of cha-cha is the only sound in the canyon. The headless snowman in the middle of the road has been bulldozed because it was an eyesore. The big snowman in the sapling forest is still there, still maintaining a smile made of stones, looking at the woman digging a hole in the distance. In the small courtyard with a fence, a table was placed in front of the main room, with a bowl of snow accumulated in a wooden bowl. The snowman sitting on the stool was wearing a freshly sewn white robe, and 2 swords made of wood were hung around his waist. The fish caught from the river were hung neatly in the window, and more than a dozen fish almost covered the window. Eunuchia stopped outside the sapling forest without disturbing the woman and the black dog in the peach blossom forest. He looked at the neatly dressed snowman at the table with his dim eyes, shook his head and smiled, but he didn't know what it meant. Cha! Cha! The woman's physical strength was not very good, so she dug in the frozen soil for a while, stopped to rest, wiped the sweat on her cheeks with her sleeves, and moved her eyes to the snowman sitting at the table, still, as if thinking about something. After a while, he softly recited 2 lines, Huangliang Menjusan Spring Festival Gala, Why Bother to Meet Again After Farewell? And other poems. After resting enough, he continued to lift the hoe, and the cycle started again. After an unknown amount of time, the tired black dog stopped and squatted on the ground to breathe. Finally, out of the corner of his eye, he spotted the old man standing not far away. He shivered in fright and quickly barked fiercely. Woof woof. The woman turned around and saw Eunuchia standing outside the sapling forest. There was surprise in her eyes, but she was not surprised. She quickly turned her face back and continued to dig a hole with her small hoe. I won't go back. I'm already dead. You can't catch me. There was a bit of dissatisfaction in his tone, as if he felt that someone had disturbed the peace in the canyon. Eunuchchia's wrinkled old face showed a somewhat humble smile again. He bowed slightly and said, The old slave is not here to arrest anyone. He has already retreated from the palace. He has been serving people all his life, but this free man doesn't know where to go. Thinking that the queen is staying here alone, and there is no one to help fetch water and wood, so come and help me. The former empress was Xiao Xiang-er, who became the empress dowager after the late emperor died of illness. There was only one queen in the Zhaohong period, Kui Zioan, who had already written sick and dying in the Zonggran mansion and was buried outside Chang'an city. However, eunuch Jia watched Songji grow up, succeed to the throne, marry a wife, and get along day and night. He probably knew Songji better than Songji himself, and he obviously would not recognize the wrong person. Kui Zioan stopped her movements and turned around again, her face a little unhappy. "Don't call me queen, I'm already dead." Eunuch Jia nodded lightly, "Then I will take the liberty of calling you Miss Kui." Kui Zioan nodded, stood silent for a while in the peach blossom forest, and muttered, "I happened to be on duty with Lin Su, and we chatted and laughed with no return date. Well, come in and talk to me." Eunuch Jia bowed slightly, walked into the forest of saplings with his hands behind his back, and looked around like a passerby admiring the scenery. Kui Zioan returned to the small fenced courtyard with a hoe, picked up a kettle from the kitchen, looked around, took out a wooden bowl with a bowl of snow, cleaned it, poured a bowl of hot water, and asked, "Where's Jia Yi? Why doesn't he come back?" Eunuch Jia crossed the fence, took the wooden bowl with both hands, sat down at the table, shook his head and said, "Jia Yi's son was not very smart. He died in the palace last year in order to help Songyu rebel. His body was later buried next to the queen's mausoleum." Oh! Kui Zioan's emotions were always written on her face. She was obviously a little disappointed at this time. She put down the kettle and there were only two stools, one with a snowman sitting on it, so she sat on the lounge chair next to her. "Why didn't you tell him that I was here? He has been in a daze since he was a child, telling him not to enter the palace and insisting on entering. Even if I am dead, I don't know how to go back." Eunuch Jia sighed softly. In order to reduce the feudal vassal, Duke Kui planned this secret thing with the Holy Father. "Kui Gong took you back, and only 2 or 3 people in the world knew about it. Jia Yi is your dead man, if he doesn't believe it, others won't believe it, so he can't know." Kui Zioan has disliked these struggles for power since he was a child, and his eyebrows showed a little anger. "The emperor gave me a glass of poisonous wine and asked me to drink it, so I drank it. He didn't tell me any of these messy things." Eunuch Jia put down the wooden bowl, thought for a moment, and shook his head. "It's a long story. When the Holy Emperor first succeeded to the throne, his original intention was to add one more king to the 7 kings, and enfeoff his compatriot Songyu to Yuzhu as king of Yan. The price paid for this move was not small. How could Guan convince all the major kings? The nobles, princes, generals, and ministers all thought hard about it. It's a pity that Songyu didn't live up to his expectations. He exchanged a few letters with you and didn't even meet you, so he forgot his identity. Later, the Kui family wanted to compete for the queen, but things had reached that point. The emperor's wedding banquet could not be left empty. The wedding envoy sent you to Chang'an. As an emperor, it is impossible for the emperor to give up the mother of a country just for the sake of brotherhood. Songyu is also a pig-headed man. He is the vassal king in Yuzhu and has enough power to compete with the kings of Su and Chu. However, because of his love for his children and his grudge against the emperor, he rushes into the imperial college to become a teacher. If he just taught with peace of mind, the Holy One would not force Songyu. However, after Songyu spent several years in the imperial college, he forgot his original intention, saw the benefits of the power in the hands of the emperor, and regarded the Holy One as an enemy of the throne, secretly recruiting people to take back the throne. The matter has come to this, and the brotherhood is gone. An emperor cannot be merciful. All he can do is use this opportunity to exchange for greater benefits. Songyu was indecisive in doing things. He wanted to usurp the throne, but he was also afraid of being infamous throughout the ages, so he was not decisive enough. In order to find a fig leaf for him, Kui Gong suggested using your death as an excuse for Songyu. As expected, Songyu did not dare to see you before his death, but after his death, he stayed behind closed doors every day to paint, showing his infatuated side to outsiders. When he usurped the throne, he kept shouting that he was trapped by love and would avenge you. Song Yu is a hypocrite to begin with, and Song Ji is also a hypocrite. Kui Zioan frowned slightly and pointed to the largest peach tree in the forest. They are just like that tree. In order to grow bigger, they completely cover the sun, regardless of whether the small tree will die. Even if it doesn't matter if it grows from the same tree's seeds. Eunuch Jia chuckled at this. Emperors should be like this. If they are not selfish and ambitious, they cannot keep their family property. If the current emperor is not an emperor, he is no worse than any gentleman in the world. How many years have you been in the palace? I know you. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 573. The fenced courtyard was bathed in the morning light, with an old man, a young man and a snowman sitting in it. After Kui Zioan listened to what Eunuch Jia said, she was silent for a moment, slightly unhappy, and leaned on the recliner. It's boring not to mention the emperor. Are there any poems in Chang'an City recently? You stay in the imperial study every day, so you should know a lot. Read it to me. Eunuch Jia knew Kui Zioan's temperament, so he didn't continue to talk about the emotions he had been holding back for these years. He thought about it and said with a smile. There are a few songs, the wind abides in the dust and the fragrant flowers are gone. Kui Zioan sat up and smiled. I've heard of this. It was written by Li Qingzhao. Li Qingzhao. Eunuch Jia was stunned for a moment, looking at the snowman next to him with dim eyes. After a long time, he nodded. It seems that it was really written by Li Qingzhao. That guy didn't lie. Kui Zioan looked at the neatly dressed snowman. He did not lie to me. But he couldn't tell where Li Qingzhao was from. Sushi, Tangbohu, and Xinkiji couldn't tell either. The explanation he found was particularly far-fetched. Do you know him? I know you, a little kid from the northwest. He even calls you aunt. Kui Zioan was a little unhappy when she heard this. I'm dead. I feel like he's older than me. How can I call him aunt? He calls me girl. He didn't say his name, and he didn't ask for yours. I asked, but I didn't tell him. Kui Zioan raised her hand and pointed to the kitchen window. He is good at catching fish. He caught all those fish. I thought he was interesting and wanted him to stay for a few more days. But he knew it clearly and pretended not to understand, so he left anyway. It's the same as everyone else outside. Eunuch Jia chuckled lightly. Everyone can't help themselves. You are like this, and so is he. As an old slave, I have finished my life. I can go wherever I want to go, and stop whenever I want to. Snored. Kui Zioan leaned on the recliner, swaying, and was silent for a while. Will the emperor take me back to the palace? Eunuch Jia thought for a while. No, as an emperor, you have always cut off the vassal. You are already dead. It will be difficult to explain why you were allowed to fake your death when you go back. According to the way of the Holy Emperor, the matter of reducing the vassal is over, regardless of success or failure. You should really die to avoid being used as evidence to expose the use of your biological brother. However, you are the legitimate daughter of the Kui family after all. The situation is unclear at this time, and the Holy Emperor can no longer have conflicts with the Kui family, so he has been delayed. There's something going on. The old slave came here just for this reason. He had to do something with Jia Yi and his son. Kui Zioan showed some dissatisfaction on her cheeks. Then why didn't the emperor just kill me back then? Well, it was Mr. Kui who came up with the method. Tiger poison cannot eat its seeds. How could Mr. Kui let you really die? Furthermore, you must leave a way out when doing things, just like finding the antidote to the locking dragon poison first to prevent things from getting out of control. If Songyujian, if you succeed in usurping the throne, you will definitely destroy the Kui family. Your survival is the Kui family's only life-saving talisman. But now, you are indeed useless. You're not using me, what kind of daddy? Kui Ziowen's eyes were a little sad, looking at the sapling forest where hundreds of peach trees were planted. When I was young, my father was very kind. He said that I could live in the peach blossom forest all my life, and I would never have to go out if I didn't want to. As a result, he brought in a painter who painted me very ugly, and then persuaded me to enter the palace. At that time, the young lady of the Tang family had been elected as the queen. I asked him what was going on, and my father was vague. I knew that my father had also changed and would definitely kill the young lady of the Tang family, so I asked Jia Yi to tell the young lady of the Tang family to run away. It turned out to be that way in the end, and that Song Yu said in his letter that the palace would not choose me to be the queen, and that the emperor and my father would listen to him. I was quite grateful to him, but in the end, none of what he said was true. He came here to apologize and said there was nothing he could do, so why are you boasting about being powerless? And that guy from a few days ago ran away even though he wanted to stay for a few more days. The voice is soft, and all the emotions are reflected on the surface, never hiding it, but there is no hatred or complaint, just simple likes or dislikes, just like saying that this tree has grown crooked and that tree has grown short. The only person in the world who can communicate with Kui Ziowen and understand her thoughts is probably AncientChina. AncientChina is nearly 80 years old. He has seen the rise and fall of an empire, from emperors and generals to concubines in the harem, from the civil and military officials of the Manchu dynasty to ordinary people in the city. Basically, he has seen everything from life to death. He has seen through the world a long time ago. Bearish. Kui Ziowen, on the other hand, has not been involved in the world since she was born. She has always looked at all living beings from an outsider's perspective. Although their experiences are completely different, they look at things from the same perspective. AncientChina held the water bowl and listened quietly. After dealing with princes and generals for a long time, he still found the children's words interesting. He didn't have to think hard about the meaning behind the twists and turns. He just took care of an old man like him who was about to die. An old man and a young man just sat in the courtyard and talked for a long time. Kui Ziowen was very talkative when she met someone she wanted to talk to. She talked about all the people she had met in the past, and finally stopped at the person she met a few days ago. That guy also said that there is a big flower sea at home, where he has planted hundreds of kinds of flowers. There are all kinds of flowers in the world. The scenery is different all year round. Now there are endless wintersweets, camellias, and clivias as far as the eye can see. I don't think he is lying. Is there such a place in the world? AncientChina nodded with a smile. There is one. I have heard of it, but I have never been there. Kui Ziowen thought for a while. Then where will I live in the future? Otherwise, the emperor will figure it out one day and send people to kill me. It will be useless for me to hide in the cellar. When AncientChina heard this, he hesitated a little. That place is private, I'm afraid it won't be good for you to go. That guy is pretty good. The sea of flowers he grows must be in a mess. I can borrow a small place to stay and help him grow flowers. If he doesn't appreciate it, we'll just come back. Hee. AncientChina sighed and stood up on his knees. That place is a bit far, are you sure? Just walk slowly and we'll be there. I'm fine and so are you, right? AncientChina nodded. This is what people from outside the world are like. Kui Ziowen stood up, took the wooden bowl and chopsticks from the cupboard, and went to the house to get clothes and books. Then he closed the door, tied a small hemp rope around the black dog's neck, and let him out. He crossed the fence, took a few steps, and then turned back. Is there anything else? Eunuch Chia looked around twice with his hands behind his back, shook his head, chuckled, and muttered, I originally wanted to be buried in this place with beautiful mountains and clear waters, but what a life of running around. And followed slowly. Kui Zioan carried the package on her back and led the little black dog, walking briskly on the forest path. The sun is setting in the daytime of the mighty Lizhou, and I sing my whip to the east and point to the end of the world. Falling red is not a heartless thing, it turns into spring mud to protect flowers. No matter where you go, it will turn into mud wherever you bury it, it's the same. My old bones probably won't be able to support a few flowers. Eat some fat. Woof, woof dash. Well. The sound faded away. The canyon hidden in the world was completely quiet, leaving only a snowman in a white robe sitting at the table, looking at the hundreds of peach blossoms outside the fence, until the spring breeze pulled out the first bud. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 574. The 29th day of the 12th lunar month, the eve of the new year. The sound of firecrackers and gorgeous fireworks can be heard in the distance above the Fen River in Taiyuan City. There is singing and dancing in the huge city where hundreds of thousands of people gather. Even the frontier army camps that stretch for several miles are immersed in the atmosphere of bidding farewell to the old and welcoming the new. After 800 miles of traveling, Su Buling arrived at Yetu Bay in the upper reaches of the Fen River late at night and found the building ship moored in the port. Taiyuan is far away from Yuzhou and is located on the west side of the eastern front. It is 900 miles away from Chang'an. Going west, passing Luliang and Yanzhou, you will go directly to the vicinity of Yuanzhou. Ziliang soldiers and horses are stationed in Yuanzhou. When you get there, it's like going home. When they arrived in Taiyuan, the Wolf Guard and the pursuers had disappeared, but the Jade Seal was still with him. For the sake of safety, Su Buling did not rush on the road with great fanfare, and his whereabouts were still hidden along the way. When they arrived at the port on the Fen River, it was already past 3 o'clock. Jeju and Chuchu, who were riding on the same horse, were close to each other. They were both drowsy, with a bit of haggardness on their cheeks, obviously caused by the long journey. Ning Qingyi has a strong character and never shows her weak side in front of Su Buling. She sits upright on the horse, her long hair fluttering in the night wind, and she looks quite chic. Seeing Chu Chu sleeping on Zhongli Jeju's back, Ning Qingyi said, "Why are you running in such a hurry? Aren't you afraid of exhausting your ninth girl to death?" Zhongli Jeju was drowsy, but she woke up immediately after hearing these words. She didn't dare to say harsh words, but said softly, "What the hell, Miss Ninth, Qingyi, just call me sister." Su Buling walked beside Ning Qingyi. He was actually very tired, but when he saw the boat floating on the river in the distance, he smiled with relief. Tomorrow is the New Year's Eve. We have to sit down and have a meal together as a family. It's okay to be tired now. We can have a good rest when we get to the ship. After Ning Qingyi saw the boat, he quickened his horse speed and ran to the river. Su Buling followed closely with Nightingale and his master and apprentice. He turned over and dismounted on the shore, and the palace guards came over immediately. The lights on both floors of the ship were out. Only the wedding room on the second floor was still lit, and the silhouette of a woman riding was revealed in the window. Su Buling saw this and asked the guards not to disturb the girl's rest. He led the horse to the deck and walked quietly to the ship building. Zhongli Jeju didn't want to serve tea to all the sisters so late at night, so she silently returned to her room. Chu Chu wanted to complain to her good sister Yufu, but it was too late to disturb others, so she went back to her room. Ning Qingyi went to Ning Yuhi's room to report that he was safe. Su Buling let Nightingale go back to her room to rest. Carrying the wooden box containing the jade seal alone, she quietly walked to the second floor, raised her hand and knocked on the door. "Dong dong. Come in." Pushing the door open, he looked up and saw a candle lamp placed on the large desk. The room was full of joy, with a bright red quilt spread under the curtain, and various gold utensils placed on the desk. Xiao Qi, who was wearing a black nightgown, was sitting behind the desk. Her long black hair was spread on her back. She had obviously just taken a shower, and her skin was still a little flushed, as bright and moving as a hibiscus. However, her temperament was still cold, and her face was still cold. No emotion at all. Su Buling entered the wedding room. Xiao Qi took a quick glance, and then turned back to continue reading the letter. However, her expression soon froze, and she turned her head suddenly. Her expression was very different from the calm expression of the past, and she stood up from the chair. He leaned against the window, covering his belly with his hands, and widened his eyes. Su Buling, why are you back? Su Buling, whose eyes were full of tenderness, also had a stiff expression. Looking at his mature and intellectual fiancé, she didn't feel any joy at all after seeing him, and she still showed such an evasive look. Naturally, she felt uncomfortable in her heart, and she frowned and said, "Kikai, what's wrong? Don't you welcome me?" "No." Xiao Qi reacted quickly, knowing that she had said the wrong thing. She quickly put down her hands and stood up straight, smiling. "Ms. Sir, I'm rude, I just didn't expect you to come back so soon. I should have picked you up." Su Buling nodded, although he was a little confused, but Xiao Qi was busy with official duties all day long and had almost no time for leisure. It was normal for her to feel a little distracted when it was too late, so she didn't take it to heart. He closed the door, put the jade seal on the desk, and raised his hand to hug Xiao Qi over and have a big fight. There was some fear and embarrassment in Xiao Qi's eyes. Her sister had drawn a talisman under her belly. She dared not let her fiancé see it. She quickly took the initiative, took Su Buring's stretched out hands, stood up slightly on tiptoes and kissed Su Buring's face. Then he said, "Let's get down to business, grown man, don't just think about Wenro Township." Su Buling knew Xiao Qi's temperament and knew that something was wrong with the current situation, so he was not too impatient. He sat down on the Taishi chair and patted his legs. "Don't waste all day /U003E/U003E. My mind is only thinking about business, so I have to rest when I need it, otherwise my body won't be able to bear it." Xiao Qi obediently sat down on Su Buling's lap and smiled softly. "I don't want this. Do you expect Xiang'er and Hongluan to fail? There must be someone who can advise you." Su Buletinling nodded, feeling that Xiao Qi was a little too good today, not at all like the domineering, strong and intellectual lady she used to be. After thinking about it secretly, she thought it was just a little farewell rather than a newlywed. He turned and looked at the desk. "Is there urgent news?" When Xiao Qi talked about business, she lost some of the little woman's shyness, picked up the letter on the table, leaned into Su Buling's arms, and said seriously, "A few days ago, the gangsters Sun Jian, Shichun, and others led the uprising in Jiangnan. It should be arranged by the king of Wu. It was premeditated and the government was slow to react. However, in just 10 days, the rebels expanded to more than 20,000 people. Muzhu's defense was loose, and the 3,000 garrison troops abandoned the city without even fighting. Now I don't know what it has become." Su Buling didn't seem surprised by this. He hugged Aunt Xiaoting and looked at the handwritten letter of his old classmate Xiaoting. "The soldiers in Jiangnan have never fought a war, and with the king of Wu interfering, they naturally fled. What was the reaction in Chang'an City?" Xiao Qi picked up another letter on the table. The emperor was furious when he asked about it, but he might have guessed that something was wrong. He did not scold the king of Wu, nor did he urge the king of Wu to suppress it, but sent a letter order the Liaxi Protectorate and the two kings of Yu and Wei to quickly send troops to Jiangnan to quell the rebellion. Su Buling nodded gently. "It seems that Song Ji is not stupid." Xiao Qi shook his head. You and I are outsiders, and we have received a lot of information, so we can see the situation clearly. Chang'an City was kept in the dark, and it is definitely not as far-sighted as you and me. The emperor guessed that it was the king of Wu who was doing it, but he didn't know the king of Wu's layout, and he just thought that the king of Wu wanted to take advantage of the uprising of refugees. But according to my guess, the two kings of Yu and Wei must have colluded with the king of Wu long ago. The king of Wu did not want to establish himself as an emperor, but relied on his strong financial resources to support the king of Wei, who had the strongest combat power, to take the throne. At this time, the order to quell the rebellion was issued, and the two kings of Wei and Yu must have pretended to obey and secretly disobeyed, and went for 1 day and rested for 3 days to delay time. Su Buling thought about it and agreed with this statement. The Jiangnan soldiers under the king of Wu could not fight at all, and the possibility of rebellion was better than nothing. The king of Wei was different. The king of Wei and the king of Yu guarded the south and confronted the Nanyu head-on. The king of Yu lived in a remote and poor place, so poor that he couldn't even get enough armor. He was just a bystander among the 7 vassal kings and had no sense of existence. Basically, the king of Wei was the only one in charge of Nanyu. Although the quality of his soldiers was slightly worse than that of the northern border, the king of Wei had the capital to compete for the world. Then Jiangnan will probably be in chaos, and I don't know how many people will die. Xiao Qi sighed. Not only that, the two kings of Yu and Wei will not move, and the Liaxi Protectorate will have to mobilize troops to suppress the rebellion. A few days ago, the news of the imperial seal and your affairs reached Chang'an. In order to prevent the king of Su from attacking Guanzhong Road, Chang'an City transferred a large number of elite troops to the Western Front. At this time, if someone tampered with the Eastern Pass, it would be too late to return to help. Su Buling frowned. Is this all planned by the king of Wu? It's hard to say, the result of all parties secretly fueling the flames. The Eastern Front spans thousands of miles from Luoyang to Yuzhou, and it is impossible to figure out where it will start. We are in the West, and it can't affect us for the time being. We can just wait and see. Su Buling didn't have any soldiers under his command, and it seemed that he couldn't do anything except watch the show. He nodded and raised his hand to untie the laces of Xiao Qi's skirt. After Xiao Qi finished talking about the business, her eyes were slightly flustered again, and she held Su Buling's hand. Husband, I'm on my period, you go find Xiang. Su Buling was a little helpless. My wife, do you think I can't remember the date? Xiao Qi was anxious. I'm tired, forget it. You don't have to move, let you relax. Su Buling put Xiao Qi on the desk with a smile, and his movements were gentle. Xiao Qi supported the table with one hand, trying to block it with her hand. Her face seemed to be red and bleeding. But she was just a scholarly lady, how could she be Su Buling's opponent? Before she could see clearly, her skirt opened. Flying phoenix spreads wings. Su Buling's smile froze, and he looked down at the dignified and intellectual Miss Xiao's. The warm and decorated wedding room was silent, and you could hear a pin drop. Seeing that the truth was revealed, Xiao Qi's eyes showed a look of wanting to cry but not being able to. Helplessly covering her eyes, she trembled and said, Xiang, that damn girl. Chi is the best, he. Don't laugh. My lady, take your hands away, I'll take a closer look. Ah. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 575. The river laps gently at the willow bank, buildings and boats are floating and sinking, the moonlight is reflected on the window paper, and the hazy light falls into the warm room. There is silence, and the picture seems to be frozen. On the small table in front of the collapse, there were several brand new robes, with silver threads outlining cloud patterns. They were meticulous from the collar to the hem. I don't know how much longing and separation were hidden in the fine and dense stitching patterns. In the light curtain room, Lu Hongluan, who has a graceful figure, is lying on her side on the soft pillow. She is quiet and elegant. She seems to have been asleep, but her gentle eyes are open, staring blankly at the portrait of the man on the wall. I don't know how long I have been watching it. It's late at night, but I don't feel sleepy at all. I vaguely remember that at the end of the new year last year, the two of them were sitting in the villa of Jinghua Garden, drinking wine. Because Yang Er gave the fine wine from her collection to Ling Er, she felt jealous, so she ran to Sun's shop and found 2 jars of strong wine and gave them to Ling Er. It turned out to be self-defeating. Ling Er got drunk, her face was red and smelled of alcohol, and she was pressed into the embroidery bed. Lu Hongluan bit her lower lip gently, and unconsciously covered the peony flowers on her chest with her hands. She felt that it was difficult to breathe, as if she was being suppressed by a heavy baby bump. That was the first time she had skin-to-skin contact with your child. Although they had done so secretly before, it was through the clothes, but that time it was with her belly band open, and she was almost scared to death when she was unprepared. But it's quite exciting. She didn't know why, but after being kissed from head to toe by Ling Er, the drunken incident didn't leave a deep impression on her. Thinking about it carefully, maybe she was treating herself as an ant at that time, and there was a sense of violation of morality. It's a pity that since leaving Chang'an City, the relationship with Ling Er seems to be closer, but in fact, it is a bit distant. She often doesn't see her daughter, and there are a lot of girls sharing her daughter with her, which makes her feel sad. Just thinking about it like this, I couldn't sleep. I don't know how long it took, and finally entered a half-dream and half-awake state. Lu Hongluan's eyes were still looking at the robe on the table until someone came from the door, picked up the robe and looked at it. The tall figure and bright smile were the same as when they first met outside Kuishao Street. I can't even forget it. Ling Er. Lu Hongluan was dazed for a moment, then full of surprise, and wanted to sit up directly, but didn't move for some reason. Maybe he was afraid that he would wake up if he moved in a dream. Su Buling took the robe and took a few glances at it. With a smile on his lips, he walked up to the back room and passed through the bead curtain. Tread. Soft footsteps came, accompanied by the soft sound of the bead curtain colliding. Lu Hongluan was sure it was real and not a dream. In an instant, her mind was spinning. Lu Hongluan hesitated, and quickly closed her eyes, wanting to wait for Ling Er to call her, then wake up slowly, and then communicate calmly. If he is too excited, your child will know that she misses him very much, and she will definitely feel guilty and feel that she shouldn't have been away for so long. Su Buling opened the bead curtain and entered the back room. He looked up and saw that in the dim light, he could vaguely see the outline under the quilt. It was cold in winter. Aunt Lu was lying on her side facing the outside. The quilt was tightly wrapped and only exposed a cheek, gentle and mature, with an indescribable charm. The embroidered shoes are neatly placed on the ground, the dark green dress is folded on the small stool next to it, and there are several pieces of rice paper folded countless times next to the pillow. I will take a look at it before going to bed. There are clear creases, but it is as clean as new. Su Buring stood by the bed and looked carefully for a moment, then took out the fire stick and lit the candle. The dim firelight sprinkled the bedroom, adding a bit of warmth. Lu Hongluan closed her eyes and did not wake up, but her eyelashes trembled slightly, and she turned over to lie down, avoiding the light. Su Buletinling had a smile on his face. He spent the longest time with Aunt Lu. It was obvious at a glance whether he was pretending to sleep. He didn't do anything. He squatted beside the bed, stuffed his hands under the quilt, and groped gently. The quilt was very warm, and soon I touched a large ball. It was warm and delicate, and I could feel the heartbeat slowly getting faster underneath. Boom boom. Huh. Lu Hongluan's cheeks turned red visibly, but he remained motionless. He didn't want to wake up just now, but now he doesn't dare to wake up. Su Buling didn't mean to take advantage and let it go. Anyway, she was his aunt, not an outsider. At that moment, she massaged Lu Hongluan very skillfully to relieve the depression of being alone in an empty room for a long time. Lu Hongluan's temperament was always soft at the slightest touch. How could he stand this? He bit his lower lip and endured it for a moment. He found that Su Buling's hand had slid down even further. He quickly opened his eyes, his eyebrows were slightly furrowed, and there was something in his eyes. Distinguishing shame, anger, and blame is like treating a disobedient junior. Unfortunately, before she had time to speak, Su Buling said with a smile. I know, you are my aunt, no need to say it. BR/U003E. Spit dash. As soon as Lu Hongluan woke up, she could no longer suppress her shame and anger. She shrank inside and grabbed Su Buling's hand. Ling why are you like this? You make all this mess when you come back. It's nothing like before. Is there any? Have. Lu Hongluan glanced at Su Buling, obviously full of longing, but said dissatisfied. In the past, when you came over at night, you would just watch outside the tent and not move a muscle, and you would only say words to make me happy. Su Buling smiled, lifted up the quilt and lay down directly in it. That's for sure. Can you treat your aunt the same as you treat your daughter-in-law? Lu Hongluan tensed up. Even though there were only two people in the room, he still instinctively raised his eyes and glanced up before letting Su Buling hug him and raised his hand to pinch his waist. What kind of daughter-in-law? You still have to call me aunt outside, and you can call me Hongluan in private. You have been out for so long this time, are you not hurt? Su Buling hugged Lu Hongluan's shoulders tightly and said with a smile. No injuries, just on his way. Lu Hongluan carefully groped Su Buling's body with her hands. After finding no bandaged wounds, she secretly breathed a sigh of relief. She raised her upper body with her hands and lay on Su Buling's chest, condescendingly. How many girls did you hook up with when you went out this time? I'm afraid there won't be enough room on the boat, right? The tone was sour. Su Buling felt relieved when he heard this tone. This time he felt confident and said seriously. I didn't hook up with any girls when I went out this time. I won't take anyone to Suzhou in the future, just the few on the boat. Real. Real. Lu Hongluan blinked her eyes and saw that Su Buling was not lying. She frowned again and lay back softly. Your Majesty, you don't think I'm jealous and you're afraid that I'll be angry, so you don't try to seduce women, right? I'm just talking about it, and I'm not really trying to stop you. No, don't think too much about it. Su Buling lay on the warm bed, thought for a moment, and turned his head to look at Lu Hongluan. Aunt Lu, you will return to Suzhou in a few days. My father is probably almost ready for the wedding. How about you come in together? Lu Hongluan was silent for a moment and whispered, your mother and I are married to Jinlan, and your father treats me as his sister. If I marry you openly, I won't be laughed at to death. Su Buling looked a little helpless. If you don't marry, you will still be the daughter-in-law of the Xiao family and call Xiao Qi aunt. What will we do in the future? Oh, stop talking, I'm so annoyed by this. Su Buling shook his head. Okay, I'll discuss it with Xiao Qi. Xiao Qi is your elder now, and there's nothing you can do to make the decision for you, right? Lu Hongluan's heart has long been with Su Buling. Who doesn't want a happy marriage? After staying alone on the boat for nearly 2 months, her heart has been shaken. The man who nodded and shook his head didn't refuse immediately. Seeing Lu Hongluan, Su Buling finally relaxed and showed a bit of a smile. Can you now? Lu Hongluan was panicked, and her eyes were slightly embarrassed. Your Majesty, don't be so hasty, woman, that's very important. When I return to Suzhou in a few days, I'll prepare it. If it doesn't mean that the matchmaker is marrying you, you have to wear a hijab, reveal at once, otherwise I will always think that I am your aunt. That's so exciting. Ling you are getting worse and worse. Go find Xiang. She is going crazy. She has been acting like a monster on the boat these days, and she is almost tormenting Xiao Qi to death. Lu Hongluan pushed gently, moved his erratic hand away, and turned around, leaving Su Buling with a slap on the back of his head. Su Buletinling possessed Lu Hongluan's face and kissed him twice, causing Lu Hongluan to pull up the quilt and cover his face, and then stood up with satisfaction. Go to bed early. Well, take it easy, Xiang is neither light nor heavy, be careful of exhaustion. Don't worry, Aunt Lu, you still don't know what I'm like. You're such a big girl, it'll be a good thing if you don't hide out in 2 years. Su Buling shook his head and smiled, helped cover the quilt, then turned and walked out of the room. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 576. Su Buling walked out of the room, gently closed the door, and glanced in the corridor. The lights were on in the deepest room at the stern. It must be that Bao, who likes to stay up late, had already learned the news from the maid. At midnight, most of the people on the boat were asleep and it was very quiet. Su Buling walked silently through the corridor and past Ning Yuhi's room when he heard some voices inside. Xiaoning, Mr. Su really beat old Situ to the ground. Well, it's a pity that you didn't follow me, but since your martial arts skills are so poor, it will probably be too late to keep up. Can you speak? Mr. Su loves me and doesn't want me to be in danger. King Yi, are you not injured? Master, I'm fine. I've been running around behind you, and I didn't even have a chance to draw my sword. It's a pity. TCH, I thought you were helping Mr. Su. You said you were doing so for a long time. Su Buletinling is afraid that I will be in danger. Hey, that's what I said. Zhu Manzi likes to sleep with Ning Yu, and when he comes back at night, he will inevitably talk about it for half the night. Su Buletinling shook his head slightly, listened for a moment and then walked over to the door of the deepest boudoir. I raised my hand to push the door, but it was locked and I didn't push it. Su Buling blinked, a little confused. However, although the door was not opened, the reaction in the boudoir was very fast, and Xiao Xiang's slightly lazy voice came. I went to bed and didn't miss you at all. Let's talk about it tomorrow. Su Buletinling was a little amused and knocked again. Baby, open the door quickly, I'm here to pay the bill. I'm tired, so I won't drive. Su Buling sighed, straightened his face slightly, and said in a harder voice. I'll count to 3 and don't open the door. Don't cry later. There was silence in the room, obviously timid. After a while, Xiao Xiang walked behind the door and reluctantly opened the door bolt. Under the dim light of the fire, a graceful figure appeared from behind the door. She was wearing a red nightgown. The fabric was thin and had a hazy flesh color, outlining her gourd-like figure. The golden lotus flower on the skirt was faintly visible. Her cheeks are exquisitely made up, her lips are as red as vermilion, her cloud-long hair is tied up with gold hairpins, and her emerald green earrings are still gently swaying after she stops. She is indescribably stunning. With this gorgeous makeup, it was obvious that she had just gotten up and dressed up, but Xiao Xiang looked a little sleepy, leaning against the door lukewarmly, and hummed softly. I've already gone to bed. It's so late at night. Why are you here? Come and rest, I live here. After Su Buling entered the room, he picked up Xiao Xiang and walked to the back room, still squeezing her hands. Xiao Xiang was pretending to be calm at first, but she became a little anxious when she was picked up horizontally. Her bare feet swayed gently in the air, and her hands patted Su Buling's shoulders twice. Su Buletinling, you are so presumptuous that you do anything when we meet. Su Buletinling paused and frowned slightly. What? Don't you miss me? Xiao Xiang'er naturally thought about it, almost to death, but as a daughter, she couldn't act more eager than a man. She frowned and said, Where did you go to my sister just now? Su Buling nodded. She didn't rest just now, so she went over to talk about some serious matters. Xiao Xiang'er's ruxing eyes blinked. You think I don't know your virtues? How about, is my sister pretty? Su Buling felt a little funny just thinking about it, so he nodded and said, It looks good. Your sister is crying and scolding you at the same time. It's so pitiful. That's your own sister, and you can do it? Xiao Xiang'er snorted softly. Who told her to hold me down so enthusiastically last time? She didn't treat me as her sister at that time. Let me go. You're tired. We'll talk tomorrow. Su Buling was reluctant to let go, walked to the back room, and threw the baby on the quilt rudely. I'm not tired, I'm very energetic. As soon as his back touched the quilt, Xiao Xiang'er could no longer maintain his momentum. Knowing that he was doomed tonight, he frowned slightly. We haven't seen each other for so long. Is this all you can think about? Su Buling untied his belt and nodded seriously. So magnanimous. Xiao Xiang'er had nothing to say, and she had no choice but to accept her fate in the face of such a stinky brother. She thought for a while, then rummaged under the bed, took out a pair of red shoes, and threw it to \U003E \U003E. Su Buling, well, you made it custom made. I tried it on my baby and almost broke my foot. Su Buling took over the well-made high heels with some admiration in his eyes. My baby is still good, come and try it on. You put it on for me. As you command, baby. The ship was ups and downs, and I don't know how long it took. The lights in the boudoir were still on, and the house was a little messy. Lotus flowers, robes, and nightgowns were thrown on the floor, some of which were torn. The air was filled with a sweet smell. The curtain was lowered, and Xiao Xiang'er was lying on Su Buling's arm. Her cheeks were slightly red and she was sweating a little. The long-term irritability and loneliness were vented, and even the spirit improved a lot. He finally returned to the old baby adult appearance. He held a mahogany sign in his hand and used a carving knife to carve the word on the side of Su Buling's debt repayment. Su Buling hugged Xiang'er and watched carefully, smiling and saying, The debt is being paid a bit slowly, otherwise. Xiao Xiang'er bumped Su Buling lightly with her shoulder. You have traveled such a long way, and I don't want to make you pregnant, otherwise Hongluan will get weird again. By the way, you are also a heartless person. You have been pregnant for so long. Even if she doesn't come back, she asked Ning Yuhi to come back and ask me to draw a picture for her. I am a woman, and the two women are hiding in the room and sneaking around. Hongluan likes to guess, and now he doesn't look right at us. Thank you for your hard work, baby. Who told you to be so clever and clever? It's good to know. Speaking of Taoist Master Ning, why don't you have any hair? You look like a little girl. Born, do you want to? Bah, are you a human being? How can you have such an idea? What is being a daughter's house? Well. Su Buling blinked. Just say it, don't take it seriously. Humph. Xiao Xiang'er felt relieved and continued to carve the small wooden plaque and asked, You went out this time and didn't bring any girls back with you? No, I went out this time to do business. How could I take a girl to the boat when I see her? Xiao Xiang'er nodded with satisfaction, thought for a while, and then asked, Yus who is so big, but you haven't met any special girls? Well. Su Buletinling hesitated a little. Xiao Xiang'er had been sleeping in the same bed for so long. He immediately smelled something was wrong. He put down the wooden sign and turned around. staring into Su Buling's eyes. Be honest, if you hide it from me, I won't make those little things for you in the future. Yuhi and sister's tails are ready, and I will throw them into the river later. Su Buling looked a little helpless. It's not the kind of special you think. I should say special. It has nothing to do with the relationship between men and women. When I was in Yuzhou, I met a little village girl who lived in seclusion in the mountains. Well, I felt a little mentally retarded. The logic of speaking is different from that of other people. Xiao Xianger seemed to understand, but thought about it. Idiot. Being thrown into the mountains. It's not that she's stupid, she's just different from normal people. She's special because that village girl gives people a weird feeling. She's like a piece of white jade, without any flaws. She's very protective, but also afraid of accidentally giving someone to her. It's dirty, and I have to be careful even when I speak. I feel like I'm afraid of teaching bad things to children. I can't quite explain it. Su Buling thought about it carefully, but it was hard to describe, so he made a metaphor. It's like a mortal meeting an immortal. The emotions and desires of a mortal cannot enter the eyes of an immortal, so he will deliberately correct himself to avoid being dismissed by the immortal as a Philistine. I wonder if you can understand. Xiao Xiang Ruyuer frowned slightly, thought carefully, and nodded slightly. It is inevitable for a fool to think that a wise man is stupid, because he cannot understand the purpose and original intention of the wise man's actions. Well, I have heard of such people. Basically, the Buddhist monks who achieved enlightenment, the Taoist immortals, and the Confucian saints recorded in the books, they are all described in this way. As the saying goes, image comes from the heart. There are probably only a few people in the world who can cultivate themselves to such an extent that even you think they are Philistines. No, when Empress Kui was still alive, she seemed to have a similar comment. The little one is mistaken for life at first sight and so on. I heard that people who have met Empress Kui will never forget her, but they only dare to watch from a distance and dare not play with her. Even the current emperor is like this. When I was in the palace, I had contact with Queen Kui, but Queen Kui was withdrawn and did not communicate in depth. Oh, forget it, Queen Kui is also a pitiful person, let's not mention it. Su Buling nodded, put his thoughts aside for the time being, and stretched out his hand. Okay, I'll tell you, hand over the tail. Xiao Xianger snorted softly, I gave it to you during the day. If I give it to you now, you will definitely use it to bully me. Give it or not? No. Yet I was wrong. Ding dong. While the two were playing around in the quilt, a slight noise suddenly came from the terrace of the outhouse. Su Buletinling paused and looked around, only to see a figure in white sneaking in. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 577. In the room next to the river bank, two masters and apprentices, Ning Yuhi and Ning Qingyi, were lying on both sides. Xiao Manzi was lying in the middle, resting his chin on his arm. He fell asleep unconsciously, his eyelashes trembling slightly, and he looked like he was sleepwalking. In Yuzhou, accompany Su Buling to kill everyone. The bed in the guest room was too small, and the three of them must have slept in a crowded place. Ning Qingyi did not take off her clothes, but simply accompanied her master and Manzi to chat and reminisce. At this time, seeing Manzi sleeping, she gently covered the quilt and got up. He put on his boots, then looked back at Ning Yuhi, winked, and signaled Ning Yuhi to go out. Ning Qingyi was born with a cold and expressionless face. This act of calling people out to talk things out naturally has different feelings in the eyes of different people. Ning Yuhi had something to hide from his apprentice, so when he saw this look, he was almost frightened to death, thinking that his affair with Su Buling had been exposed, and the smile on his demure face froze. She thought for a while, lowered her head, slowly stood up and put on her dress, and followed Qingyi to the corridor. She hesitated to speak, but she was afraid that if Ning Qingyi's voice was even louder at this time, she would be able to put it on her. Scared to cry. Ning Qingyi did not feel the unnaturalness of her master behind her. She walked out of the room slowly, stopped in the corridor, looked at the sparkling river, and frowned. It's ridiculous. As soon as the words came out of his mouth, Ning Yuhi shuddered and quickly grabbed Ning Qingyi's wrist with a look of fear and helplessness. Qingyi, maybe he didn't mean it, it's all my fault. Ning Qingyi was confused and turned around, looking up and down. Master, do you know this? Ning Yuhi's expression froze. She realized that the apprentice was not coming for her, and was frightened to death. She quickly calmed down her emotions and nodded slowly. I know, alas. What do I know? I know, what to do, what to do. Ning Qingyi was confused and frowned. Master, you know that Su Buling and Zhongli Jiju sleep together, why? What? Ning Yuhi's hair suddenly exploded, his eyes widening with anger. Ning Qingyi paused again and tilted her head slightly. Well. Ning Yuhi, who was originally quiet, almost lost his temper when he was startled. He hurriedly calmed down and said slightly angrily. He and Ye Juniang sleep together and let you watch. Ning Qingyi blinked Kinkan's eyes, thought for a moment, nodded, and shook her head. No, I saw it secretly. Since you knew this, why didn't you tell me? Also, why do you say it's all your fault? It's over, it's over. Ning Yuhi was slightly shorter than Ning Qingyi, clutching the hem of her skirt tightly, like a child who had made a mistake standing in front of his parents, but he had to act like a master. Not daring to look at Qingyi, she turned to look at the moon in the sky, her mind racing, and she sighed softly. Well, didn't I have a conflict with Ye Juniang? Your child likes Ye Juniang, so I didn't agree to it, and even warned Ye Juniang. Well, you know that woman's temper. It's nothing, as soon as I warned her, she had an idea and got serious, so it's my fault. If I hadn't talked too much, Ye Juniang wouldn't have gotten together with Ling Er. After holding it in for a long time, I finally got over my panic. Ning Qingyi nodded slowly, convinced of this statement, and sighed softly. Chu Chu also likes Su Bulet and Ling, I can see it. How can they, master and apprentice, serve the same husband together? Then when Ye Juniang gives birth to a daughter, should Chu Chu call her sister or daughter? Think about it. Chaos. I'm thinking about this too. Ning Yuhi's face was full of embarrassment, he did not dare to face his apprentice, and kept looking at the moon in the sky. Actually, it's nothing. Ahem, I mean, there are a lot of things like this, you just haven't been exposed to it. In a prince's family, there are even 3 generations of old, middle, and young people serving the same husband. Ning Qingyi opened her mouth and her eyes were filled with astonishment. Master, what are you talking about? Ning Yuhi didn't know what he was talking about. He was so panicked that he had to keep calm. Sometimes there is nothing we can do, we have to be more tolerant. Chu Chu and Ye Juniang are not related by blood, and they are not very old. They both like Ling Er. We can't force one of them to break up, don't you think? We would rather break up. 10 temples, don't ruin one marriage. Ning Qingyi thought carefully for a long time and nodded slightly. That's true. Ning Yuhi pursed his lips, yes, your son is a prince, and his concubine is more noble than a commoner's wife, and he will not treat her badly. Since you are in love with me and can afford to support me, the whole family will be harmonious and beautiful. What's wrong? If you have to care about these etiquette and rules, you're at a disadvantage, don't you think? Ning Qingyi raised her green-white jade fingers and scratched her hair. Ning Yuhi sighed and said seriously. I have never taught you these principles before. There are many difficult things in this world. If you try to get into trouble with everything, you will not be able to survive. Just understand good and evil, and know right and wrong. There is no need to impose the requirements of saints on yourself. Everything it's best to let nature take its course. Ning Qingyi thought for a long time. Oh, okay, well, that's what the master taught me. Okay, go to bed and have a good rest. Good. Ning Qingyi turned around and walked towards the room. After taking a few steps, she tilted her head slightly. It was obvious that she had not yet digested the concepts taught by her master. Ning Yuhi kept smiling, and after watching his good disciple disappear into the room, his gentle cheeks gradually became stained with shame and anger. This damn boy actually. Ning Yuhi thought for a moment, then jumped into the terrace at the back of the ship as lightly as a swallow and entered Xiao Xiang'er's room. /U003E /U003E. In the boudoir, Su Buling heard the sound, raised his eyes and saw Ning Yuhi walking over. His eyes lit up slightly, thinking that the master remembered their agreement. He raised his hand and waved. "Master, come here quickly." But after Ning Yuhi opened the curtain, his anger could no longer be suppressed. He walked up to him and raised his hand to slap Su Buring on the back. "Evil fellows, evil fellows, evil fellows." Xiao Xiang'er, who was pressed down, was a little embarrassed. Seeing this scene, he raised his eyebrows, slightly pulled up the quilt to cover the two lumps, and said curiously, "Yuhi, what's wrong with you?" Su Buling knew it must be because of Jeju's incident, so he didn't dare to block him when he was beaten, and said with a smile, "Master, don't get excited. If you have something to say it properly." Ning Yuhi breathed quickly, raised her hand and patted it a few more times, and then saw Xiang'er lying with a red face. She turned around quickly and said in a deep voice, "Su Buling, why are you and Yejuniang together?" Xiao Xiang'er had already regarded Zhongli Jeju as her younger sister, and was not surprised at all. Seeing the jealousy of Ning Yuhi, who had always been as gentle as water, he did not say a word, but just watched the joke silently. Su Buling sat up and pulled Ning Yuhi to sit in front of him. "Master, please listen to my explanation. Things have to start from Bodhi Island." At that time, Su Buling whispered softly, describing the battle situation under Bodhi Island as full of dangers, and that it was only thanks to Zhongli Jeju's erudition that he could escape, and was forced to worship. He also slightly changed it to the two people falling in love in desperate situations. Ning Yuhi listened carefully. Although he didn't like Zhongli Jeju very much, he also knew that Zhongli Jeju was very capable and was very helpful to Su Buring. Her anger was mainly caused by Ning Qingyi's fright. After sitting for a while, she calmed down. After waiting for Su Buling to finish explaining, Ning Yuhi sighed, glanced at Xiang'er who was watching the show, stood up and said, "That's all, I don't blame you, you continue." As he said that, he wanted to leave and give Xiang'er some private time. But as soon as she stood up, her wrist was held. Su Buling said softly with a bit of a smile, "You're here, Master promised last time." Ning Yuhi's expression froze, and he secretly tried to break away, but couldn't. The expression of the baby watching the show also changed slightly, and he quickly frowned and said, "Don't hold me down and bully me again, I'm going to fall out." When Ning Yuhi saw that Xiao Xiang'er didn't stop him, his face gradually turned red. He turned around and his eyes weakened. "Ling-er, why don't you forget it?" Xiao Xiang'er knew Su Buling's temperament and would definitely not give up. She thought about it and suddenly said, "Yuhi, don't you have a bad relationship with Sister Jeju? Just drag her over and torment her. From now on, we are all a family. It's not good to lose your temper." When Su Buling heard this, his expression froze. Baby, are you sure? Are you afraid?" "You are kidding, why should I be afraid?" "What should I be afraid of?" "Well, Master is not happy, don't force her." Ning Yuhi had already broken the jar, thought about it, nodded and said. If we want to die together, I'll call that damn bitch over, and you'll take care of her later. Hey, master, you. Dong dong dong. Ning Yuhi did not listen to the advice at all, walked out of the door, and walked quietly to the outside of Zhongli Jiju's house. Zhongli Jiju has gone to bed and the house is very quiet. Ning Yuhi hesitated again and again, took a breath, raised his hand and tapped. Ye Juniang, come out and I'll talk to you. In the room, Zhongli Jiju woke up. When she heard Ning Yuhi's voice, she knew that her love rival was here to cause trouble. But Zhongli Jiju and Ning Yu have been fighting together for so many years, and they have all been in vain. How can they get stage fright now? Zhongli Jiju stood up, made a victor's gesture, opened the door and walked out, casting a glance at Ning Yuhi. What? Come and chop me? Come on, come on. Ning Yuhi became angry when he saw this, his face was like frost and snow, he turned and walked towards the depths of the corridor. Follow me. Zhongli Jiju was a little confused, but on the boat, she now had a husband to rely on, so she was not afraid that Ning Yuhi would go crazy and throw her into the water. She immediately tightened her clothes and followed Ning Yuhi, joking. Hee, are you angry? It's better to defend yourself or to fetch water from a bamboo basket. I got in before you, huh? Why did you come to Xiang'er's room? You want to form a clique to train me together? Sister Xiang'er and my relationship is closer than yours. Ning Yu's legs were trembling, and she tried hard to stay calm. After opening the door, she pushed Zhongli Jiju in. Get in here. Hey, you do it with so much force, what? Zhongli Jiju glanced at the scene in the room and was slightly startled. Ms. Sir, are you there too? Sister Xiang'er. What are you doing? Yeah, sorry to bother you, I'm going out with her right now. Hey, Ning Yuhi, are you crazy? Let me go. How could you do this, sir you? We have you, behind. Don't, I just obey. Ning Yuhi, I will fight with you, who is afraid of whom? The lights went out and the voices grew quieter. The long night, complete silence amidst the ups and downs of the ship. The transition chapter is a bit watery, but I have to write it anyway, so I wrote it. It's the end of the month, please vote for me, I'll be in the top 100 soon orts. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 578. The water of the Fen River is calm, not as rough as the Yellow River. Merchants who have no money to lose on New Year's Eve come out to run boats. The boatmen and porters have all gone home to celebrate the new year. The port is full of boats, but there is no one there. Before daybreak, Song Yufa got up early. In the Imperial College, it had become a habit to light an oil lamp early to prepare for lessons. Now she has not changed it. After washing, she sat at the small desk by the window and wrote in a book. Circle and circle. As the sun rose in the east and the morning light diluted the lights, Song Yufa closed the book, stood up and blew out the lights. As soon as I got up, I saw outside the boat building, in the corridor next to the river, a noble man in white as snow, holding his hands on the railing and looking at the river. From the back, he looked a little tired, and his back was not as straight as before. Like the edge of a sword. Mr. Su. Song Yufa's eyes lit up, and after she made sure that she was not mistaken, her goose egg-like moist cheeks showed a bit of joy. She didn't even leave the door, trotted to the window, and jumped directly from the waist-high window. When Su Buling heard the noise, his posture instantly returned to straightness. He stood with his hands behind his back, lonely and cold, looking at the mountains, rivers, and sunrise, and said slowly. The solitary smoke is straight in the desert, and the sun sets over the long river, well, it's really round. Song Yufa struggled to get out of the window and trotted forward with her skirt in hand. Her earrings were dangling and she looked a little excited. Maybe he realized that he had lost his composure. After hearing Su Buling's voice, he quickly folded his hands on his waist, pretending to be demure and elegant, walked up to Su Buling's back, bent down, and bowed like spring water. "Master Su." "Oh, Yufu, are you up so early?" Su Buling turned around, smiled, glanced up and down, and gently tightened Song Yufu's furry collar. "It's cold outside, be careful of catching a cold." Song Yufu's face was slightly red, and she raised her eyes to look at her lover who was very close at hand. She had been hiding thousands of words in her heart for the past few months, but she didn't know what to say when they actually met. After thinking about it, she nodded shyly. "Well, I'm used to it. When did you come back?" "I just came back last night." "You were asleep and I didn't disturb you." "Oh." Song Yufu nodded, carefully looked at Su Buling's face, and suddenly frowned slightly. "Mr. Su, why are you so pale? It's freezing cold." "Why are you red again?" Su Buling coughed lightly, held Song Yufu's little hand, leaned over and shut up. Song Yufu's eyes were slightly panicked, her face turned red, and she tilted her head nervously. "There are so many people here, Wu." After all, she still didn't hide away. Song Yufu froze for a moment. After realizing that there was no one around, she stopped moving. She stood on her toes and held her breath until she was almost suffocated. Then she lightly patted Su Buling on both shoulders. "Down." Su Buling let go of his mouth, looked at Fubeo who blushed like an apple with a smile, raised his hand and pinched his face. "Are you satisfied?" Song Yufu was so embarrassed that she almost forgot her last name. Just now she wanted to ask why she chanted Long River Sunset Yan so early in the morning, but she couldn't remember it at this time. She pursed her lips, turned around and ran into the shipbuilding, and here she is. Sentence, "You're so annoying." Su Buling didn't catch up, and continued to stand by the boat to breathe and adjust his breath. In the early morning, the girls in each room got up one after another. Today is New Year's Eve. Yunu and Xiao Yi are instructing the maids to prepare meals. Dodo is used to staying on the boat, but her silly temperament has not changed. When she saw Song Yufu came in and hurriedly ran to her. Miss, the master is back. Hey, why did you come in from outside?" Song Yufu put away the shyness on her face, pretended to be a well-educated and scholarly lady, and gently lectured. "I was surprised and did something. I'm back as soon as I'm back. Go and help with the cooking." "Oh." Dowdu scratched his head, a little puzzled. "Miss, don't you think about tea and food instead of tea? Why aren't you excited when you are back?" "Why am I excited? Do you think I am Manzi? By the way, where is Manzi?" Both Miss Zhu and Mrs. Yang got up late. The sun hasn't even scorched their butts yet, so they definitely didn't get up. Miss Chu Chu did get up. Song Yufu felt happy when she heard this. She has the best relationship with Chu Chu. They have become best friends who talk about everything in Huainan, and they naturally want to say hello when they come back. After asking Dowdu to go down to help, Song Yufu quickly walked towards Zhongli Chuchu's room. Unexpectedly, when passing by a room, the door suddenly opened, and a woman in a navy blue dress jumped out, hurriedly, almost hit her. Song Yufu looked intently and saw Zhongli Juju coming out of the room, with a strange look on her face, ashamed and angry. Embarrassing. Angry. Feeling uncomfortable? Anyway, I have so many mixed feelings that I can't tell what the expression is. In addition, his walking posture is a bit strange, and he is carrying a small package on his shoulders, as if he is going on a long trip. Sister Zhongli, you. When Zhongli Juju went out and saw Song Yufu, his face froze. He wanted to retreat to the room, but felt it was inappropriate, so he could only quickly restrain his sadness and anger and said with a smile. "Good morning, Miss Song, Um, what a coincidence. What a coincidence. Song Yufu was confused and glanced up and down. You just came back last night and are you going to go on a long trip? Zhongli Jiju looked at the small package on his shoulder, with a somewhat speechless look in his eyes. Last night she fell into Ning Yuhi's trap and was dragged into Xiang'er's room. It was no use even trying to kill her husband. No one would be offended by pretending to be stupid and he didn't protect her. Zhongli Jiju was still very conservative in her heart. She had never seen such an embarrassing scene before. She was not prepared at all and was stripped clean and pressed on the bed. Seeing that she could not escape, she was not a shy woman. She would not lose the battle even if she lost the man. After all, they were all Su Buling's women. Even Ning Yuhi dared to be so bold. What was she afraid of? Let's go together. But she was still too young and underestimated the wickedness of human hearts. Originally, she wanted to let go and be jealous to anger Ning Yuhi, but Ning Yuhi was unusually generous. She was afraid that Su Buling would ignore her, and she helped to hold her hand and said, "Ling you didn't eat? Jeju is tough and can bear it. He has no conscience. Why am I tough?" Zhongli Jeju was so angry just thinking about it that she was almost going crazy. She rolled her eyes and was dizzy. Xiao Xiang'er covered her mouth to prevent any sound. She couldn't even beg for mercy. She didn't know how she managed to get through it. That was fine. In the end, somehow, Ning Yuhi and Xiao Xiang'er found that she hadn't found another way yet. They immediately felt that it was unfair, and then they fanned the flames. Su Buling, the conscienceless one. Zhongli Jeju had a strange expression. She still felt a little uncomfortable behind her, but how could she dare to tell outsiders about this? Su Buling didn't come to comfort her in the morning. She couldn't just bear it. She pretended to run away from home to scare Su Buling. Seeing Song Yufu's weird look, Zhongli Jeju looked a little embarrassed and smiled. "I'm not going far away, I just prepared some medicine and took it to Su Buling to see. There are quite a lot, so I put it in the package." "Really?" Song Yufu was half believing and half doubting, but she was not very familiar with Zhongli Jeju, so she didn't ask about it. After a slight nod, she continued to walk in. Just walked a short distance, she saw Ning Yuhi's room door open. Ning Yuhi, wearing a white long dress, was sitting in front of the dressing table combing her hair, and humming a little song, looking very happy, even a little floating. Song Yufu blinked, glanced at the door in confusion, and was discovered by Ning Yuhi. Ning Yuhi stopped humming immediately, her face returned to its usual gentleness and quietness. She turned around and said softly, "Miss Song, you got up so early." "Yes, good morning, Taoist Ning." Song Yufu was a little suspicious, thinking that these two people were weird, but she couldn't tell what was wrong, so she walked over directly. When she came to Chuchu's room, Chuchu didn't stay in the room. There were some noises in the distance. She looked up. Zhongli Chuchu and Ning Qingyi stood together outside Xiao Xiang'er's room at the stern, whispering something, and in the room, Xiao Qi's cold voice was faintly heard. "Xiang'er, you get up. If I don't teach you what seniority means today, you will have to fly to the sky with wings." "What's wrong, sister? Why are you so angry? Did I provoke you? You. Speak, why are you staring at me?" Song Yufu shrank her neck slightly, knowing that the two sisters had started fighting again. These days on the boat, Xiao Xiang'er has been torturing Xiao Qi a lot. Xiao Qi is like a scholar who meets a soldier and can't explain herself clearly. The bullied one often chases Xiao Xiang'er with the ruler, and then Lu Hongluan runs to mediate. The three of them are crazier than her and Manzi. As a young girl, Song Yufu was too embarrassed to run in to mediate, so she came to Lu Hongluan's door and whispered, "Madam Lu, Sister Xiang'er and Miss Xiao are arguing again, please go and persuade them." Lu Hongluan was tidying up Su Buling's new robe for the new year in the room, and she didn't care at all when she heard the voice. Don't worry about the two of them, they are already grown up and still don't know the rules. What's there to argue about during the new year? Yufu, go see if Linger is up, and let him come over to try on the clothes. Oh, Mr. Su is up, I'll call him over. Song Yufu smiled, then turned around and ran out again. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 579. The family was chatting and talking to each other, and it was soon dusk. On the Fenlis ship, the maids prepared meals and set up tables on the deck. Dozens of people gathered around several tables and began to eat the New Year's Eve dinner happily. Xiao Qi did not forget to serve as the hostess and gave each maid a guard. Got a big red envelope. In the hall on the backside of the shipbuilding, the girls were sitting together, Xiang Xiao Qi, Hongluan, Yu He, Jeju, King Yi, Shuchu, Manzi, Yufu, Nightingale, plus a male host. Su Buling, this may be the first time for everyone to have dinner together like this. Although the living room is large, 11 people obviously cannot sit at one table and are divided into 2 tables. Su Buling sat at one table with 5 elder sisters, and 5 little girls sat at another table. It was a bit imperfect, but it was obviously impossible to get a big table on the ship, so we had to wait until we returned to Suzhou. When they first sat down, many girls had their own thoughts, especially Jeju and Yuhi, who were still thinking about what happened last night and making sarcastic remarks to each other. However, after a few glasses of wine, my thoughts were gradually overshadowed by the smell of home and the new year, and smiles gradually appeared on my face. I toasted, poured tea, and greeted sister back and forth, and the atmosphere became more and more harmonious. The little girl at the table was a little more reserved at first because of her age, so Nightingale was very natural. However, under the guidance of Pistachio Manzi, they gradually integrated into it. They exchanged glasses with each other and said some auspicious words, and then Manzi drank too much. Xiaoning, you are so unloyal. Are we friends? When we were in Chang'an City, I accompanied you shopping and catching thieves every day. Our friendship was lifelong. In the brightly lit living room, Zhu Manzi was wearing a brand new little skirt. She looked cute and full of energy, and her bulging breasts were the most spectacular among the little girls. Her face was flushed and she was obviously drunk. She had her hands on her waist and glared at Ning Qingyi next to her. Ning Qingyi sat upright. Qing Quan had some doubts in his eyes. What's wrong with me? Zhongli Chuchu, who was watching the show, snorted lightly and said to himself, what do you think is wrong with you? Miss Song has told me about eating secretly behind my sister's back and pretending to be the same. Song Yufu, who was engrossed in eating and not talking, secretly thought something was wrong, and quickly opened her mouth and looked to the next door. Mr. Su, Mr. Su. Su Buletinling, who looked majestic and distinguished, heard the sound, retracted his hand that was touching his aunt's leg, and turned his head to look at the table next to him. Yufu, what's wrong? Song Yufu's eyes were full of help, and she signaled to Manzi. I hope the girl is drunk. Zhu Manzi quickly shook his head, I'm not drunk. This is just a few glasses of wine. When I was in Chang'an City, I drank from a bowl. Su Buling was a little amused when he saw this. The New Year's Eve dinner was almost done anyway, so he stood up, took Manzi's little hand and walked out. Okay, I'll take you out to sober up. Zhu Manzi was indeed a little drunk. After thinking about it, he smiled sweetly, hugged Su Buling's arm, and walked out, rubbing his cheek against Su Buling's arm, like a cat. Puff. Seeing this, The hall burst into laughter. Even Ning Qingyi tilted her head helplessly, speechless for this sister. Walking out of the warm room, the winter chill hit me. Zhu Manzi didn't drink too much. He woke up from the cold for a while. Hearing the sneers behind him, he realized that he was holding Su Buling's arm. His face suddenly turned red. He quickly let go of his hand and wanted to go back and explain a few words about his drink. I was drunk, but it was obviously too late. Su Buling put his arm around Xiao Manzi's shoulders and said with a smile. Brothers put their arms around each other, what's there to be shy about? No, there are so many people. Zhu Manzi's face turned red and he glanced back, they must be laughing at me. It's just a joke, what's the big deal? With a calm expression, Su Buling came to the corridor on the side of the ship and looked at the Fen River waterscape outside. You are the Fen He Sword God, a famous heroine. How can you care about the eyes of outsiders? Well, others laugh at me because I am too crazy. I laugh at others and they can't see through it, right? Zhu Manzi was still a little embarrassed, but he was naturally carefree, and it was no secret that he liked Su Buling, so he nodded immediately. Su Buling raised his hands to support Manzi's waist, placed her on the railing along the edge of the boat, and then sat on it himself, curiously asking. What did you want to say just now? Why do you say Qingyi has no loyalty? Zhu Manzi was a three-legged cat, sitting on the railing for fear of falling, holding the pillars with his hands, swinging his embroidered shoes in the air, and gently kicking his skirt. She gave Su Buletinling a glance and snorted. There was no loyalty to begin with. She kept saying that she and you were just friends in the world, and she and I were good sisters. But, she ended up secretly sleeping with you behind my back, and she kept it secret from me, huh? Su Buling was slightly startled and sat up straighter. Really? When did I secretly sleep with Qingyi? Zhu Manzi raised his eyes and took a look, pouted and said, Miss Song told me, she said she saw it with her own eyes, and you admitted it. Well. Su Buletinling immediately understood that it must be the last time he bumped into Ning Yu. He thought for a while, shook his head and said. That's not what happened. I just kissed Qingyi and didn't do anything else. Kiss under the covers. Su Buling couldn't explain it very well, so he got a little closer and raised his hand to scratch her nose. What, jealous? Why am I jealous? Zhu Manzi hugged the pillar and looked at the water. I regard Xiao Ning as my sister, how could she hide it from me, and Daning, who is also a bit weird, seems to be hiding something from me. I am smart, yes, I didn't ask. Su Buling shook his head helplessly. Don't think about it all day long, you will know it later. By the way, your home is near Fenhe River, right? Zhu Manzi was a little drunk and asked and answered questions. She raised her finger and pointed to the west. 50 miles away, outside Qingxia County, there is an Osmanthus forest. My home is there. My father and my mother are gone. Well, actually, I don't miss you very much, he. Silly. Su Buling sat in front of him, swaying his legs, and thought for a while. Bring you out, I originally wanted to go to Yuzhu's house with you, but there is really no chance. We are already at the door of the house. The girl who wants to get married, always you can't even go back home. Did you say before that you are a well-known big shot in your hometown, and you don't even need to pay for going to restaurants and listening to books? You have to let me see you, right? Zhu Manzi grew up by the Fen River since he was a child. He has been away for several years. How could he not miss her at all? She hesitated for a moment, then smiled and said. That's right. I'm not bragging. I was working as a small catcher in the county at that time. Although my martial arts skills are not as good as Xiaoning's, I can beat a few gangsters without any problem. The folks in the county respect me. I passed the Wolf Guard assessment. When I was transferred to the capital, there were still many people who were reluctant to part with me, especially Mr. County Magistrate Liu, who personally sent me on board the ship with great ceremony. He spoke with a hint of drunkenness, which seemed a bit funny. However, Su Buling could tell that he was not bragging. The selection of wolf guards was strict. Even the Daisian wolf guards patrolling the streets must be the best among ordinary policemen. Man Zi's martial arts skills are nothing in the world, but he is still considered a good player in the market. In addition, he is smart, lovable, and enthusiastic, so it is normal for him to be loved by his neighbors. Zhu Manzi muttered for a moment, his mind became clearer and clearer, and he turned his head again. Actually, there's no need to make a special trip just for me. It doesn't matter if you come back or not. You still have to get married, so don't delay. Su Buling shook his head and smiled, we are far away from Yuzhu and there are no pursuers. We are not in a hurry for a day or two. The two of us will go there tomorrow morning and come back in the afternoon before setting off. Zhu Manzi thought for a while, but did not refuse, but whispered, it's not interesting for two people to go. I told Xiao Ning and Xiao Zhong before that Fen He Niang is the best wine in the world. They didn't believe it, so they opened their eyes, and the whole fish feast in Fen He River is delicious, you will definitely like it. Su Buling nodded, okay, I'll listen to you. We. Snap. While he was talking, firecrackers suddenly sounded from all directions, and Taiyuan City in the distance suddenly became brighter, and the fireworks were as bright as day. The 12th year of Zhaohong has arrived. The two stopped talking and sat on the railing, watching the colorful fireworks in the sky. Their boots were swaying above the river, and the sparkling colors reflected in their eyes. So beautiful. Yeah, it's quite romantic. What is romance? Romance is. Woo. The light of the fireworks flickered on and off, and the two people leaned together silently. Fireworks rose above the ground, and the sound of firecrackers spread all over the place, and then slowly became silent. Every house was lit with lights. Looking from the river to the coast, the lights stretched to the end of the field of vision. Manzi leaned on Su Buring's shoulder and fell asleep unconsciously. His face was still flushed, and he didn't forget to hold Su Buring's arm to prevent him from falling. With a smile on his face, Su Buling quietly got down from the railing, returned to the room with Manzi in his arms, carefully covered himself with the quilt, and walked out of the room quietly. The New Year's Eve dinner was over and the boat had become quiet. There was a vigil on New Year's Eve, and the maids gathered on the deck. Chu Chu, Qing Ye, and Yu Fu were sitting in the room playing chess, but the others were missing. Su Buring was slightly confused. After looking around, he walked up to the wedding room on the second floor and met Nightingale at the top of the stairs. There was a little sparrow on Nightingale's shoulder, and her eyes were rather strange. She said softly, "Don't worry, sir. Sister Xiang'er has already told me that we need to discuss something very important. Please leave Miss Ning and the others alone." Su Buling frowned slightly, a little confused, and quickly went up to the second floor, opened the door of the wedding room, looked up, and gasped. The wedding room is filled with incense and brightly lit. 4 beautiful women, wearing red, black, white and blue nightgowns, are lying side by side on the large wedding bed, leaning against the bedside. The scene is mind-blowing. Blood. Zhongli Jiju and Ning Yuhi both looked down at their fingers, obviously being forcefully pulled by Xiao Xiang'er, while Xiao Qi was looking at him in confusion. What's even more weird is that Lu Hongluan is also in the room, wearing a dark green light nightgown, walking past with dice and a small wine bottle in his hand. When he saw Su Buling coming in, his face turned red and he frowned. "Ling what are you doing here?" Su Buletin Ling's expression was stiff, he put his hand on the door and said with a dry smile. "Yeah, what am I here to do? Well, I'm going down first, you guys can play slowly. Etc." Xiao Xiang leaned in front of Xiao Qi, her ruxing eyes full of different meanings, and she raised her fingers. Su Buletin Ling, come and celebrate the new year for you. New Year's Eve. Su Buling took a breath and smiled, baby, don't be ridiculous, I'm going down first. Are you afraid? It doesn't matter, thank you for my kindness. Hee hee, Su Buling is not afraid, he is just worried that he will make Aunt Lu angry and cry. He has to go back to Suzhou to give Aunt Lu a beautiful night of flowers and candles. He must not mess around now. If Aunt Lu is watching, Aunt Lu is currently guilty. After hesitating for a long time, Su Buling still couldn't resist the baby's eyes, silently closed the door from the inside, and started this colorful night. Thank you Siang Zongji for the 10,000 reward. Thank you to Mr. Liuj King for the 10,000 reward. The transition plot is over, and the story will come later, so today I will update 2 chapters. Please give me a monthly ticket or 2. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 580. The north wind howls, sweeping across thousands of miles of snowfields and mountains. In the endless wilderness outside the majestic pass, the snow has not melted with the arrival of the new year. On the ridge, a blind old wolf fell behind in the pack and staggered alone in the vast world, arriving at a place where there might be food in his memory. The old wolf stopped at the top of the mountain and took a bird's-eye view of the ant-like soldiers in the distance. His scarlet eyes, filled with bloodshot eyes due to hunger, scanned the snow-covered land, revealing a bit of confusion. The cold wind was mixed with the aroma of wine and meat coming from behind the city wall. The old wolf was salivating, but that was not what he came for, because the stone mountain that appeared at an unknown time could not be crossed or even approached. One eye was blinded because the aroma of wine and meat brought him nearby. The reason why the old wolf came here is because when he was a child, he followed a pack of wolves. Whenever the mountains were blocked by heavy snow and they couldn't find prey, the alpha wolf would take them here to have a look, saying that the ground here was full of meat, so they could eat it directly. There is no need to spend all your energy catching and killing the meat to eat. The fresh flesh and blood is everywhere, and 100 wolves can't finish it in a year. It's a pity that every time the wolves come here, all they see is the vast snowy field in front of them, and the eyes of the alpha wolf will show the same confusion as it does now. The old wolf has always thought that this was a lie, and maybe the first wolf also thought so in his heart. After all, the first wolf also learned about this news from his father, and had never seen it with his own eyes. However, after it becomes the alpha wolf, it will still bring the wolves here. Because there is no food at all in the snowfield, just like it is now, if you don't believe it, you have to come and take a look. Unfortunately, the scene I saw was still exactly the same as before, nothing. The old wolf was so hungry that he couldn't stand upright with his hungry limbs. He lay down on the mountain ridge and stared at the white snowfield below. At the last moment of his life, the only thing he thought about was when did this news passed down from generation to generation begin? Was there really a wolf that had seen the fresh flesh and blood on the ground below? Master, if there is a wolf, will it bite us? It's already dead and doesn't bite. The sun shines on the desolate ridge, and as far as the eye can see, there is not even a tree, only the vast white snow. The girl with braids was holding a wooden stick in her hand as a hiking pole, struggling to climb up in the wind and snow. His little face was flushed with cold, and he was wearing a red jacket he had just put on during the new year, with a leather water bag hanging around his waist. Perhaps because she rarely climbs mountains and is timid, the little girl looked a little clumsy and kept walking behind the adult. After seeing the old wolf lying on the ground and frozen into an ice sculpture, she hid on the other side of the adult. The adult is dressed in a white fox fur and a felt hat. The long hair under the hat is spread on his back. He is very tall and has a rather elegant face. He is not much different from the Confucian students in the Central Plains. However, he has lived in the grasslands since he was a child, which makes his temperament look much different. A bit indescribably heroic. The adult stopped beside the old wolf and admired the never-before-visited beautiful scenery behind the pass. The fox fur on his body moves with the wind, and his body is as stable as a mountain, as if it is more solid than the mountains at his feet, enough to hold up the entire sky. The girl with braided horns stood next to the man in the fox fur coat, still a little afraid of the old wolf next to her. When she saw the old wolf lying motionless in the snow, she poked it with a long wooden stick, then quickly hid back, raised her cheek and said curiously, "The wolves I encountered on the grassland were all very fierce. They were in groups. Was this wolf abandoned by the family?" The man in fox fur looked into the distance with an easygoing voice. "Wolves are different from people and will not leave their families behind. When a pack of wolves is on the road, the old wolf always leads the way, followed closely by the strongest, and the young women and children walk in the middle, and then the strongest wolf guards in the back. The last one is the alpha wolf who keeps an eye on the entire team to prevent the playful little wolf from getting lost. This wolf is blind in one eye and may have gotten separated in the snow." The girl with the braid said "Oh," thought for a moment, squatted down in front of the old wolf, tilted her head and looked carefully. "Why did it come here? All creatures in the world have spirituality. Fish migrate not because they miss home, but because it is easier to survive in the place where they were born. They remember that place and it is engraved in their bones and will never be forgotten from generation to generation. Wolves come here because there used to be food here, which could help them survive the harsh winter, so wolves would come here every year, and this has been passed down from generation to generation." The man in fox fur sat down on the snow in front of the old wolf, took out his water bag and took a sip, and said with a smile, "It's the same for people. The farther you go and the more desolate the place you go, the more you miss the beauty of your hometown. There is no shortage of salt and iron, good mountains and good water, and you can grow food by throwing seeds. There is no shortage of food all year round. Being able to eat the fruit has been engraved in my bones where my ancestors have lived for thousands of years, and I even want to die there." The girl with the braid seemed to understand, and nodded. "Master, are you talking about Jiangnan? Where is it better than where we live? There is grass everywhere. I used to eat steamed buns and rice, but I still wanted to eat meat every day, but now I really do it every day. When I eat meat, I want steamed buns again, and so does my mother." The man in the fox fur chuckled and looked at the distant Xiongguan. "It's good to think about it, but I'm afraid that if you get used to it, you will forget the real good things." The girl with braids sat cross-legged in front of her in a decent manner and watched for a while. "Today is the first day of the first lunar month. There should be lion dances, magic tricks, candied haws, sugar figures, steamed cakes, dumplings." As he spoke, he swallowed, and his face turned a little red. The man in fox fur also swallowed his saliva and nodded. "Master is already greedy. Do you want to go over and have a look?" The girl with pigtails bit her lower lip and nodded like a chicken pecking at rice, then she said with a sad face, "The city gate is closed and I can't get in. I don't know when it will open." The man in fox fur chuckled. "Master will open it for you." As he said that, he raised his left sleeve, and a carrier pigeon flew out and flew to the north. The girl with pigtails was a little puzzled, staring at the south eagerly for a long time. "The door is not open, master is lying." The man in fox fur had a calm face and didn't say anything, just watching calmly. Dong dong dong. After an unknown period of time, bursts of muffled thunder suddenly sounded in the clear sky in the north, as if a ferocious beast that had been exiled for thousands of years was roaring softly, and even the earth trembled. "Master, why is it thundering?" The girl with pigtails was a little confused, got up from the ground, ran to the other side of the high ground, and looked at the north from where she came. At the end of the vast snowfield, black clouds rose out of thin air, reflecting a strange luster in the winter. "That is a knife, a war knife?" The blade is like an endless wave, spreading to the end of the sky. The iron hoof of the Mobei horse shattered the frozen earth. The man with disheveled hair roared like a hungry wolf, staring at the peaceful and harmonious world in the south. They grew up there for generations, but they were exiled for a decade. Since they were born, they have never been able to see the place their parents talked about. The mountains and waters there were originally theirs. When they were driven out, they had their hair loose for a decade. They have endured humiliation and endured hardships for 60 years. In the wild land that they despised for thousands of years, they have fought with wolves for food and lived with cattle and horses. They have had enough. Their descendants can no longer stay there and become barbarians who eat raw meat and drink blood step by step. Even if they die, they have to stay at home. People pay attention to returning to their roots. It is better to die on the land that should belong to them than to stay in Mobei as a stray dog. They are all men of the Central Plains. Why should we cherish death? Kill. Enemy attack. War drums thundered, and at the Ningguo Pass, beacon fires suddenly rose.